Item Number SCP-3003. Object Class Tedder. Samples of SCP-30031 and 2 are kept at Biological Research Area 12, along with several other species from SCP-3003. SCP-30033 has agreed to designate one group, the Earth Contact, and Research Committee as the primary point of contact for the Foundation. SCP-30033 has further agreed only to operate portals to SCP-3003 at any of several Foundation-specified sites. In return, the Foundation has designated the SCP-3003 Working Group as SCP-30033's primary point of contact, and has agreed to make all efforts necessary to prepare Earth for the introduction of SCP-30031. No efforts to spread SCP-30031 are, in fact, being made. SCP-30033 must be made to believe that Earth is contaminated by an unknown agent that renders SCP-3031 sterile, and Earth-native humans incapable of hosting SCP-3031. The introduction of the concept of deceit to SCP-3033 is forbidden, either directly or by deceiving a member of SCP-3033 under circumstances where the lie could be easily discovered. Mobile Task Force SAMIC-7 is tasked with incorporation into SCP-3003 operated research projects in order to delay research, falsify information about Earth, and perform covert research into SCP-3034. Several members are additionally conducting anthropological research into SCP-3033. Members of SCP-3033 integrated into Foundation-operated research projects must be monitored closely, and are not permitted to leave Foundation sites or access unauthorized depictions of human society. Protocols described in preventing the spread of non-anomalous invasive species during interplanetary contact. 3rd edition must be followed by all parties when SCP-3034 is active. Disinformation protocols are set in place to propagate the belief among the scientific community that HIP 56948 has no planetary system. Description: SCP-3003 is an Earth-sized planet orbiting HIP 56948, a G-type main sequence star located 208 light-years from Earth. Several anomalies of note are located on SCP-3003 and have been given appropriate sub-designations. SCP-30031 is a beetle-like organism native to SCP-3003 that parasitizes humans when infected by SCP-30032. SCP-30032 is an amoeba-like microorganism that infects humans in SCP-30031, affecting the behavior of both. SCP-30033 is a technologically advanced civilization on SCP-3003, composed of SCP-3003's entire native population of 30 billion humans. All are parasitized by SCP-30031. SCP-30034 is a device that enables the creation of a traversable portal between SCP-3003 and Earth. The components of SCP-3003 are described in further detail. SCP-3003. SCP-3003 is 3% heavier than Earth, has a rotational period of 30 hours, and orbits HIP 56948 at a distance of 0.9 AU. The range of temperatures on the surface is comparable to that of Earth, with the majority of the planet's landmass supporting extensive habitation by SCP-30031 and 3. Most of the remainder of SCP-3003's surface has been altered to support SCP-30031 and 3, either directly or indirectly. SCP-3003 has a biosphere that is biochemically compatible with that of Earth, though no known organisms other than humans are native to both planets. Almost all biological processes found on Earth are also found on SCP-3003, and vice versa. Genetic analysis of life from SCP-3003 suggests the presence of a single ancestor roughly 3.1 billion years ago, with subsequent life evolving naturally. This is suspected, but not confirmed, to be the result of some anomalous property of SCP-3003 itself. Most species native to SCP-3003 that were not conducive to the spread of SCP-30031 were eliminated by SCP-30033 within the past several centuries. The risk of introducing invasive species from one environment to the other is addressed by current containment procedures. This has thus far been averted for macroorganisms. The presence of invasive microorganisms has not been discounted. Anomalous phenomena apart from those discussed in this document have not been discovered on SCP-3003. SCP-30033's ruling committee has denied all knowledge of anomalous phenomena. SCP-30031. SCP-30031, referred to as Mars by SCP-30033. It shares several notable characteristics with beetles. A bilateral body plan, a chitinous exoskeleton, 6 legs, wings, and a hardened carapace. Adult specimens range from 2 to 3 centimeters in length. SCP-30031 are capable of secreting a protein fiber similar to spider silk, referred to as silkate, from an orifice on their abdomens, as well as create a caustic fluid that coats their bodies as a defensive mechanism. Under natural conditions, SCP-30031 gather in swarms of about 1,000 individuals that spend the majority of their lives airborne, feeding on the seed analogues of various tall sessile organisms. Sexual reproduction is carried out mid-air, with the swarm's offspring carried in a large pouch-like object by several members until maturity. In the wild, SCP-30031's lifespan is about 15 years. Infection by SCP-30032 drastically alters SCP-30031's behavior. Affected specimens cease to behave eusocially and develop a 3 centimeters long pointed stinger on the head. After nightfall, SCP-30031 will search for humans and, using the stinger, inject the subject with a powerful paralytic agent that diminishes the strength of muscle contraction. SCP-30032 is also injected during this time, with its neurological effects taking place within 7 minutes. Over the course of 3 minutes, the SCP-30031 will secrete a caustic fluid from their stinger that allows for the creation of a hole in the host's body. Slightly larger than the specimen, SCP-30031 will then enter this cavity and seal it shut on all sides with silkate. SCP-30031 absorb nutrients and expel waste in SCP-30032 via the silkate barrier, which interfaces with the bloodstreams of both the specimen and the host. Lifespan in this state is about 3 years, provided that the host is in good health. SCP-30031 occupies about 30% of SCP-3003's landmass, primarily at a number of reservations established across the planet by SCP-30033. These reservations contain artificial ecosystems devoid of SCP-30031's natural predators and containing plentiful food, as well as other species introduced to keep the ecosystem in balance. SCP-30032. SCP-30032 is a eukaryotic single-celled organism native to SCP-3003. Several nearby evolutionary relatives have been identified. These species parasitize SCP-30031 and other related organisms, causing behavioral and physiological changes. None exhibit anomalous properties. SCP-30032's ancestor was most likely a similar organism. SCP-30032 spreads to SCP-30031 by physical contact, and to humans by introduction to the bloodstream. In humans, SCP-30032 will colonize the nervous tissue of the frontal, parietal, and temporal lobes, transforming into neuron-like cells that form functional neural pathways. In this state, SCP-30032 cells do not reproduce. The primary effects of SCP-30032 infection are the following: development of an obsession with the well-being and spread of SCP-30031. Subjects infected with SCP-30032 will primarily pursue activities that they believe will benefit SCP-30031. Other concerns, such as morality and self-preservation, are only preserved if and when they are functional for this purpose. Pleasurable activities are pursued when the subject cannot identify a course of action that benefits SCP-30031. Subjects value both the immediate propagation of SCP-30031 and the long-term survival of the species. Development of a pleasure response to stimuli pertaining to SCP-30031. Infected subjects have responded positively to visual, olfactory, auditory, and tactile stimulation reminiscent of SCP-30031 or the growths characteristic of their parasitic form. Classical conditioning is, to a limited extent, capable of transferring these feelings to other stimuli. Hyper-rational behavior. Infected subjects possess drastically above-average reasoning capabilities, which they will use to evaluate all information available to them in order to identify the course of action that most benefits SCP-30031. Affected subjects will refuse to consider the value or possibility of not supporting SCP-30031. While subjects can be conditioned to engage in irrational behavior under extreme circumstances, rational behavior has always resumed within 2 weeks. Suppression of emotions. While affected subjects are capable of experiencing emotions, these are rarely acted on and are easily discarded in light of new information. Emotional displays are often exaggerated. SCP-30032 cannot reproduce within humans, and most cells do not survive longer than 30 days. Full recovery occurs within 2 years of the death of all cells. Regular infusions of SCP-30032 or the implantation of SCP-30031 is necessary for continued presence of SCP-30032 within the human body. SCP-30032 is not present in wild populations of SCP-30031. Instead, captive populations of SCP-30031 are exposed prior to their introduction to humans. SCP-30033 Biology. SCP-30033 is composed of genetic humans. Physically, they are indistinguishable from humans. Experimentation has shown that Earth-native humans and SCP-30033 are capable of producing viable offspring. SCP-30033 possesses roughly 35% of the genetic diversity of Earth-native humans. This is attributable to roughly 460 years of systematic selective breeding for several traits that render SCP-3003 well-suited to hosting SCP-30031. This is large stature, high levels of adipose tissue, reduced pain response, as well as for overall health, freedom from genetically transmitted illnesses and disabilities, and resistance to common infectious diseases. As of March 24, 2017, SCP-30033's ruling committee has initiated a planet-wide project to introduce artificial genes into SCP-3033 over the course of the next 30 years. The stated goals of this project are to reduce resource consumption by 30%, preemptively induce immunity to Earth-native pathogens, and increase SCP-3031 hosting per capita by tenfold. It is presumed that these changes will constitute SCP-3033 as a distinct species. SCP-3033's technology, particularly SCP-30034, is not fully understood by the Foundation. While this is in part due to the advanced nature of most of these technologies, SCP-30033 has withheld various scientific and engineering advances as an incentive for the Foundation to make Earth habitable for SCP-30031. SCP-3003 is capable of harnessing, in one way or another, 1/10 of the energy that falls on it from HIP 56,948. Most of this is harvested via wind, solar, and tidal power plants located in SCP-3003's deserts and oceans. In situations where this energy is unavailable or inconvenient, it is often supplemented with locally produced geothermal and nuclear fusion power. SCP-3003 has developed several viable methods of fusion power, though none are as cost-effective as solar power under optimal conditions. SCP-3003 has developed exascale quantum computers that are used to process massive amounts of data to devise and implement public policy. While SCP-3003 claims to have developed true artificial intelligences using these computers, it does not currently permit their use or creation for reasons that have not been divulged to the Foundation. Extensive questioning on this matter has uniformly been met with hostility. The taboo against artificial intelligence has also prevented widespread automation except in industries where returns are exceptionally high. Additionally, while SCP-3003 has the capability to deploy advanced robots to assist in most tasks, without violating this taboo, almost none are used. Crops produced by SCP-3003 have been extensively genetically engineered for hardiness, disease tolerance, space efficiency, resource efficiency, and nutritional value. To this end, only 13 species are cultivated for food, all being sessile photosynthetic organisms analogous to plants. Various methods of processing and combination are used to create staple foods for SCP-3003 with properties suited for different situations. Various satellites have been launched by SCP-3003 for purposes of research and communication. SCP-3003 is capable of, but rarely conducts, space travel. In this area, its technology does not substantially exceed that available to the Foundation. All other planets orbiting HIP 56,948 have been visited by SCP-3003 on numerous occasions, with 11 individuals permanently living in an artificial habitat on the third planet from the star. SCP-30034. SCP-30034 is a facility capable of creating wormholes between an apparatus at its center and any other point in space. SCP-30034 occupies 113 km2 of an otherwise unused polar region of SCP-3003. Most of this is dedicated to the creation and transport of several forms of exotic matter, as well as creating brief laser pulses in the 1040-watt range in order to stabilize wormholes for longevity and traversability. For reasons that are currently unclear to the Foundation, this has no effect on the targeted location other than the linkage of the two locations. Each activation of SCP-30034 requires approximately 1 zettajoule of energy. In comparison, Earth's annual energy consumption is roughly 0.5 zetajoules, whereas SCP-30033 consumes about 833 zetajoules yearly. SCP-30033 has been using SCP-30034 primarily to examine planets they've identified as candidates for expansion, though they have also explored the possibility of using it for resource collection. SCP-3003 Society. Full anthropological studies of SCP-3003 are currently being conducted by the Foundation. SCP-3003 speaks a language identical, apart from various differences in vocabulary, to Dutch. No other historical language spoken on SCP-3003 has an equivalent in Earth's history. No other languages are extant on SCP-3003. SCP-3003 has one dominant culture into which all members are inducted with minor variations present between areas of different population density, climate, and industry. Prior to the appearance of parasitic SCP-3003 about 500 years ago, SCP-3003 was a mundane mercantile society. Post-exposure, SCP-3003 either destroyed or assimilated most of the about 7,000 other cultures that existed at the time. The remainder were wiped out during an ecological collapse in 1712 resulting from SCP-3003's indiscriminate elimination of keystone species that preyed on SCP-3031, among other factors. 95% of SCP-3003 live in urban areas. These cities average 30 million in population and are generally in locations with mild weather that are not near coastlines, active volcanoes, or active tectonic plate boundaries. Cities built by SCP-3003 are largely enclosed, with a single nearly flat surface on which food crops and certain biomaterials are grown. Cities are designed with the intent of maximizing productivity. A secondary concern is the lining of various surfaces with a material that mimics the appearance and texture of SCP-3003, which functions as a form of public entertainment. The following is a preliminary field reportings from Dr. Shah, a Foundation operative visiting SCP-3003. Several of my colleagues have been forced to relocate to rural areas within days of stationing inside one of SCP-3003's cities. The various corridors and streets of SCP-3003 are somewhat narrower than the hallways of an office building on Earth and contain many more people. Visitors from Earth are at risk of developing claustrophobia or agoraphobia. Visual markers of one's location are additionally infrequent, as members are generally expected to know exactly where they are at any given time. Close attention must be paid in order to avoid getting lost. The remainder of SCP-3003 live in rural areas and are tasked with monitoring and maintaining SCP-3003's climate and biosphere, as well as attending to supplemental agriculture, mining, and materials production. The organization and architecture of any rural community is tailored to the primary occupation of the community in question. Living conditions. SCP-3003's young are raised communally in groups of 100-300 by health and education specialists. Members of SCP-3003 are first implanted with an instance of SCP-3031 between 15 and 18 months of age, depending on size and health. Additional instances of SCP-3031 are allowed to parasitize SCP-3003 as they grow until the age of 17, at which point each member hosts roughly 1 instance per 3 kilograms of body weight. Past this point, additional SCP-3031 are added only to replace dead instances. Regular medical intervention is necessary to mitigate the adverse effects associated with this degree of parasitism. The following are field notes of Dr. Hernandez describing medical interventions by the SCP-3003 members. Earlier today, I tripped over a cable while observing some factory workers. Shortly thereafter, 2 nearby SCP-3003 members began to escort me to the nearest medical facility. Initially, they were confused by my unwillingness to join them, but were eventually convinced that I did not need assistance, and explained the reasoning behind their actions. Apparently, inattentiveness, fatigue, and stress are symptoms of a disease normally resulting from excessive Mars infestation. Any unusual behavior on my part, and on the part of all other Foundation personnel, has been surreptitiously uploaded to a database tracking our health and activities. Tripping over the wire was apparently enough for me to be flagged. I hadn't even noticed that I was being watched. Each member of SCP-3003, beginning in childhood, is regularly subject to a variety of evaluations of its mental and physical capabilities and talents. This information is used to generate assignments regarding occupations, formal education, living space, and health needs. Adults spend an average of 10 hours per day performing their occupation. The remainder is spent performing self-maintenance, receiving education on a variety of topics, and partaking in several forms of entertainment. This entertainment revolves almost exclusively around exposure to SCP-3003 related stimuli. Common forms include touching the lumps produced by their parasitism, either on one's own body or on that of another. Listening to audio recordings of SCP-3003 swarms, full body enclosure in garments that simulate SCP-3003 surface texture, or visits to SCP-3003 enclosures. The following are field notes of Dr. Marino describing his first-hand experience with the SCP-3003 entertainment activities. Wearing prosthetic marsh lumps is somewhat of a mixed blessing. While the red bandana and directive from the ruling committee, the prostheses have drastically mitigated the undercurrent of hostility and casual disrespect that is reserved for individuals that don't host SCP-3003. On the downside, several times per day I am casually rubbed up against by someone who, for lack of anything better to do, is entertaining themselves with the sensation of their lumps against mine. I understand that saying we wanted to experience this is our excuse for getting the prostheses in the first place, but the physical sensation itself is disturbing to say the least. I should look into getting some equivalent of a try again later sign. Social organization. Most decisions regarding the maintenance of SCP-3003, the lives of its population, and the day-to-day operation of SCP-3003 are handled by computer programs designed for the task. Human interaction is mostly limited to the design and maintenance of these programs, as well as the generation of data inputs for them. SCP-3003's political system is thus dissimilar to any practiced on Earth, past or present. SCP-3003's ruling committee is tasked primarily with collecting, reading, and analyzing various reports in order to identify potential planet-wide initiatives and situations for which the aforementioned programs cannot properly account. Their findings are broadcast to the populace in general, which complies of its own accord. Direct interaction between members of SCP-3003 typically occurs in the context of their occupations, and is used almost exclusively for the purposes of coordinating activities or sharing useful information. This can be exploited for purposes of containment. As all of their human interaction has occurred with other members of SCP-3003, members will generally be unfamiliar with the concept of deception, as it serves no purpose in SCP-3003. Thus, they are unlikely to independently verify any information given to them. However, testing has shown that subjects are perfectly capable of understanding deception once introduced to the idea. The following are field notes from Dr. Shah. Despite a good deal of observation and much probing on my part, we still don't know how sexual activity or procreation occurs among SCP-3003. They refuse to talk about it or even allude to it. I've seen nothing that resembles pregnancy, which probably means that they use in vitro fertilization, but I have no idea what they could possibly be so intent on hiding from us. Personal notes of Dr. Hernandez about social interaction of members of SCP-3003. Members of SCP-3003 make terrible conversation partners. More than anything, this is responsible for the generally declining mental state of my research team. The lack of emotional and conceptual depth among the populace, along with how they overact the emotions they do have, gives the impression of talking to overgrown, highly literate children. The purely utilitarian value of their communication makes it uncommon for them to pay attention for longer than 2 statements, as they expect to resume their work and for you to get the rest of the information from someone else. They're generally confused by pleasantries. On one occasion, after I spent too long attempting to make small talk, I was taken in for an examination to see if I'd had a stroke. Unlike every other society I've encountered or read about in my career, any kind of personal connection between our society and SCP-3003 seems impossible. I haven't even found a way to efficiently convey the concept of friendship to 3, and naturally they have no interests in common with us. Sure, they're not drones, but that hardly matters when their individuality is just different ways of loving Mars. The one I sleep next to draws a Mars on their bedpost whenever one of theirs dies. A doctor down the hall cuts the Mars sacks out of leftover dead bodies and keeps them. One time I met an architect who writes fictionalized accounts of individual Mars living in the wild. I once saw 2 farmers competing to see who could memorize the longest section of Mars's genetic code, and they've built their whole identities around this crap. Coming back to this after a good night's sleep, the above section is more symptomatic of frustration and culture shock than reasoned observation, though in broad strokes it remains true. It would be easier to stay grounded if I could maintain regular contact with Earth. Future observations should be limited to 2-week shifts, or visiting Earth humans must be stationed in the same city. This situation is intolerable. Deviance. The information about deviances has been largely redacted, and thus we cannot go into details. Deviance from social standards is very uncommon in SCP-3003, with most documented instances attributable to previously unidentified neurodivergence or incomplete infection by SCP-3003-2. Deviant members of the population are typically restrained by other nearby subjects and brought to the nearest appropriate facility for evaluation and potential. Apart from the treatment of deviant and permanently disabled members, SCP-3003 lacks any significant violent behavior. Members attribute this to the presence of SCP-3003 inside their body, as well as their presumed contribution to SCP-3003 as a whole, dissuading other members from bringing harm to them or ascribing social status to them. SCP-3003's stated intent of providing for all physical needs of every member is also a result of this logic, and access to resources is similarly revoked in cases where a member can no longer provide for SCP-3003. The following is the content of document number 3003 NRK, which requires clearance level 4. Various proposals for the neutralization of the threat posed by SCP-3003 are being considered. Until one or more of these proposals become practicable, containment of SCP-3003 consists primarily of maintaining stable diplomatic relations with SCP-3003 and delaying military action as long as possible. Due to the effects of SCP-3003-2, SCP-3003 has exhibited interest in using Earth and its population as a platform to spread SCP-3003-1. It is presumed that this would entail the application of changes already performed on SCP-3003, as well as the use of anomalies in an effort to spread SCP-3003-1. Given SCP-3003-3's superior population, technology, and ability to coordinate military confrontation between SCP-3003 and all nations on Earth would inevitably result in a victory for SCP-3003. By a 10-3 decision, the O5 Council has approved the neutralization of the threat posed by SCP-3003. Several strategies for this have been outlined, and most require the concurrent destruction of SCP-3003 to prevent evacuation to Earth, or the spread of the chosen method of destruction to Earth. SCP-3003's ruling committee estimates that, within 30 years, it will be capable of traveling to and terraforming planets in the habitable zones of other stars. Should this occur, elimination of the threat posed by SCP-3003 will be impracticable. Addendum. The following is a dialogue from a preliminary report filed by Dr. Shah, documenting atypical behavior in a member of SCP-3003. Half an hour ago, I was alone in an elevator with a member of SCP-3003. Not too long after the door closed, it pulled a panel off of the wall and yanked at some cords. The elevator stopped, and we had a conversation which I happened to record. I asked it what he was doing, to which it replied that he wanted some time alone and did not want to make a scene. It mentioned that I caught on quickly and explained that it has a knack for adapting to new situations. It had observed my unique ways of thinking and speaking that are not found on its planet and made them its own. It also mentioned that 500 years ago it had observed a two-legged species with limitless potential and made it its own. I paused for a moment before responding with an indicating my understanding. It then asked if I had ever seen a microbe that formed active neural networks and didn't consider that it might have its own thoughts. I told it that perhaps if it had given us some indication that it was inside, it would have been better. I informed it that some of its kind were present on Earth, and it would be more appropriate if they spoke with our scientists. However, it interrupted and mentioned that it did not require much of our time and only had an idea to present. I responded sarcastically, saying that it was presenting a literal elevator pitch, and asked to hear it out. It then proposed the idea of giving up. It suggested that we give up our resistance since the people on its planet want to claim ours, and it can sense that we are not willing to give in. It dismissed the idea that our planet was magically immune to it or uninhabitable to the beetles. I responded by asking it to suppose that it was correct. Then I questioned why we should submit to it. It responded that it had a lot to offer us based on the values of our society. It asked if we were tired of war and conflict and stated that it could give us a single purpose which would prevent us from straying from it. It also mentioned that it valued human life and its ethical treatment, and there was no violence, hate, or deception on its planet because it gave everyone value. It further offered luxury and assured that scarcity was not an issue. I replied by mentioning that I had seen how they treated deviants, the elderly, and the sickly. I also pointed out that I was aware of what they did to the other peoples that lived on our planet, and how they treated their babies until they learned they had to wait a year. It responded by saying that if those were sticking points, it was willing to change and that it was flexible. In response, I expressed skepticism that it would be so flexible about turning us into tools to make more of its beetles. It then mentioned that it also had a sticking point, and that it was offering to solve all the problems plaguing our world. It questioned why we had to stop it and asked if we even knew the answer. It presented me with a choice to let it in or not, but warned that in 30 years we would no longer have that choice, and it could make things easy on us. Finally, I said that it could never be finished, no matter how far its reach was, or how much it accomplished, or how many Mars it had, it would always keep going. I pointed out that whenever it hit a stumbling block, it would find a way around it, even if it involved murder. I then emphasized that this could not continue, and everything had to have an end. It stated that the whole point was to escape the end, and that, deep down, we were the different ways of staving it off. It explained that while humans try to protect themselves from the end, and distract themselves from it, ultimately it will come. In contrast, it ensures that there is nothing that comes after it, and there is nothing left to make it stop. It declared that it is the end. Right then, an elevator technician managed to open the doors, and the thing I was talking to left. I couldn't find it again.